Hello and welcome to the show, coming to you from London. Today we look at British perspectives on Islam. Hello, Islam is supposed to be a direct relationship between a person and God. So who has the right to get in between? How does a community set standards for something as personal as individual faith? Well, in the wake of London's bomb attacks on the 7th of July 2006, known here as the 7/7 bombings, the British government and its Muslim citizens have been struggling with the issue of how to deter radicalism within the country's more than 1,500 mosques and Islamic centres. The centre of this debate is the question of separation of church and state, or in this case, mosque and state. And although a community-based organisation has come up with a set of proposed voluntary standards for British mosques, many question how much influence the government will have in this process and whether it's really appropriate or not. On today's show, we debate this issue with two prominent members of Britain's Muslim community. And don't forget, we take your questions and comments in this programme via phone and mobile text. The numbers are on your screen. Joining me from our London Broadcast Centre is Nazir Ahmed, a member of Britain's House of Lords. Lord Ahmed has played a leading role in the British Muslim community, as well as working to resolve various diplomatic crises involving Muslim nations. Mohammed Khalil is an advisor and spokesperson for the Muslim Education Centre in High Wycombe and a community activist. And I welcome you both.
Thank you.
Lord Ahmed, if I could start with you, and it's actually a question to both, but I'll start with you and ask you to comment on a comment that was in the British newspapers recently, a comment by Musharraf Hussain, a government advisor on mosques, who said that the poor quality of locally trained Muslim religious leaders, the Imams, is failing to win Muslims back from a sense of isolation that often leads them towards extremism.
And that's because actually we don't have proper universities and proper training schemes for the Imams, although there are about 15 of them. What we really need is professional organizations which can actually deal with some of the new challenges, whether it is to do with teenage pregnancies, whether it is to do with drugs, and also a lot of problems that exist with young people, not only just the Islamic studies, but also to deal with their social and economic problems. Sometimes young people are confused. They don't know what's going on in the society. They don't know what's happening, why there's racism in society, why they're not treated equally, and all that has to be related to somewhere. And because the Imam really ought to have a kind of qualification that actually can engage with young people intellectually and theologically. Unfortunately, most of our Imams, the great majority of them, are either trained in South Asia, they don't speak English, they don't understand culture, they're quite isolated from the British system. Young people don't interact with them. And those who are trained here, because the people who are training them, they're not trained here, they're not trained from universities.
It's a downward cycle.
And so therefore, although they're speaking English, but they don't have the if you like, the training to deal with the challenges of today.
Well, I have to ask Mohammed Khalil, based on this, that suggests that to a large degree the onus for education and understanding is in the mosques rather than in the home. So that's almost removing parents and family out of the equation. Is that saying young people are prone to extremism because they have no guidance at home?
Well, in Islam, the two are interlocked, because as you know, during the school day, with most Muslim children, they will do a full school day, and then when they come from school, there'll be a small break, and they will go to the masjid, mosque, madrasa to learn about Islam. So the two are interlocked, and I think there is a strong correlation between your type of parents that you have, how they practice Islam, and the way the children can turn out. But I would also reiterate the point that Lord Ahmed has made, that we've got a strong British Muslim growth here, and we haven't got enough Imams to actually deal with those needs. We've got a lot of Imams from countries like Pakistan, Arab world, and they're not connecting with our youth where the problem occurs.
Lord Ahmed, if I could put a question to you that came in by email from Bruno Druski in Paris in France. He's a regular viewer with us, and Bruno, I appreciate you sending this in. The question is, we first have to ask, why has Britain failed to produce a society where extremism is prevented from taking root? Only when governments are forced to abstain from wars of aggression and promote economic and social development will extremism in its all forms end.
Well, I think there are a number of problems here. One is that there were ethnic minority communities who came to the United Kingdom. They thought that they were only here for a short period. They never thought this was going to be their home. Secondly, they've not been able to give identity to young people. Thirdly, the society, the government, always thought that these communities are all right, but they don't need to be integrated into mainstream society. So long as they get on with themselves and they don't cause any problems, it's got nothing to do with us. But the most important thing is that when in the last decade we've allowed extremists like Umar Bakri, Abu Hamza, Abu Qatada to run a riot almost in London and to translate and sort of interpret Islam in their own way. And they all almost became the voice of Muslims, and actually they weren't. In fact, they only had a very small minority of people following them, and yet they gave this impression that all Muslims were like that. So these fanatics were able to take on some of these vulnerable young people who then actually started to follow them.
Based on this, Mohammed, what's happened is the big debate right now in Britain is the idea of government introducing guidelines that would help set standards in mosques, really what we launched the program introduction with. Now, in your opinion as an advisor, obviously, to a Muslim community centre, to what extent do you believe that there is a right for the government to have some kind of regulation?
Sure. I mean, just also add that I am an advisor to the largest masjid in London,
right,
the Regent's Park Mosque. And we deal with these issues quite at the forefront of these issues. I think first and foremost, let's state as clearly as possible, the community, the Muslim community, do not want the government trying to impose things onto them. It will backlash. It will actually be counterproductive on the work that we have in relation to PVE, the prevention of violent extremism work. And so we don't agree on a lot of things within the community, but if the government were to try and force things onto the Muslim community with anybody, then I think you'll find that most of the community will be opposed to that.
Well, but quite frankly, I'm sure that Muhammad is well informed, but MinUp is as a result of consultation that was done after 7/7, and I had the pleasure of chairing that meeting, and in fact, we went around the United Kingdom and actually consulted with the communities from Scotland to Wales throughout the United Kingdom. And 95% of the British Muslims thought that there was a need for an organisation like MinUp that actually trained imams, but also dealt with the challenges, not only in organising mosques, because one of the things that happens in his mosque regular is that there are disputes within the committees, and because you don't have women and you don't have youth involved in mosque committees, because there are certain elders who don't want to leave the mosque committees, and there are no regular elections and there's no accountability, and then they don't actually have any connections with the Charities Commission, that because of all these reasons we need to have a major organization that can give guidelines and also help train imams.
Well, what I'll do then, obviously I'll give you a chance to answer that, Mohammed, but let me put it in first an email to you that came from Lesa in California in the USA. And Lesa says, regarding these guidelines, if nothing else, creating these guidelines will let non-Muslims in the UK know that there is a concern about maintaining a humanistic culture in the mosques.
Sure.
Taking that into account and what Lord Ahmed has said, what do you respond?
Well, again, let me clarify. I'm not opposed to any initiative that tries to get Muslims together under a banner to represent themselves to the government. No opposition to that. It's how we do it that there is the opposition. And what happens in practical terms, if you look at various bodies that have consulted with the government before, MCBs, etc., they've tended to have a very rosy relationship, and then it's gone off the boil, and then suddenly they're put on the back burner. So we've got to learn from the past. And in our consultation with the communities, as I said, the one unanimous voice that I heard was they do not want government imposing anything onto them. They do not want the government saying we will only have an imam within this category and not that category. It has to be done willingly by the community. And I'm not sure of what Lord Ahmed is talking about. We don't have a committee problem structure either at Regent's Park or at Muslim Educational Centres. I'm not sure.
I was talking about High Wycombe. But anyway, if we could just touch upon the government interfering. Quite frankly, this was a community initiative, Muslim organizations initiative, and it's supported by Muslim communities. But you know, if we don't deal with problems ourselves, then we will have, like other governments in European countries that have imposed conditions, like in Germany, that you can't deliver sermons unless they're done in German. I mean, a lot of our mosques, they don't even use English. They really ought to. They ought to translate. I'm not saying that they shouldn't speak in Punjabi or Urdu or whatever they have to for their people who come to the mosque. But quite frankly, now is time to move on. For young people, they need to speak in English, make their speeches in English so the young people can engage and also understand what's being said in the mosques.
Let me put a couple of emails to you then, Lord Ahmed. This one from Carlos in Idelone in Vancouver, Carlos Idelone in Vancouver, Canada. Carlos says, these new rules will not remove the reason for extremism. It will only result in them being pushed further underground.
Not really, no. Because you have a body that will just train imams and also train those that's already here in this country. What we are trying to do is to try and engage with young people. And what you do is you bring young people back into the mosques. Those who've gone into small corners or in small discussion groups outside the mosque. And the way you do it is if you get them engaged in the mosque committees, you get women engaged in the mosque committees, but then you encourage them to have the theological and intellectual debate inside the mosque rather than somewhere else where we have no control whatsoever.
One more email question to you then, sir. From Robert Newton in Vancouver in Canada, another one from Canada. I see no reason to have special standards for one segment of British society. We have laws, and if anyone breaks these laws, they can be punished. No other religion in Britain is subject to these rules, nor have they been asked to modernize.
Well, this is not actually, these rules are not a kind of legislation as such. These are voluntary. This is all done voluntarily by the Muslim community themselves. And the reason why they're doing it is because the problem is with the Muslim community. Let's be honest, the extremism and also the alleged terrorism that we've seen, it is with the Muslim community. And I think that when there is a problem, you have to acknowledge it first, and then you have to deal with it. If there isn't any problems within the church, and if there isn't any problem within the gurdwaras or the temples, then I'm afraid we're looking at a different place. We have to recognize the fact that there is a problem of extremism within very small minority, and they give bad name to the peaceful religion of Islam. They give bad name to the great majority. And therefore, we have to deal with that problem.
Mohammed, isn't there a good reason, and I'll get you to respond to Lord Ahmed's comments, but isn't there a good reason to have a common code or a common response from the Islamic community to condemn the acts of violence, to condemn the terrorism, to actually put forth the true ideals of Islam, which obviously are so removed from what's been happening?
Absolutely. I agree with you. And that does happen. Whenever there's an atrocity, all the organizations unequivocally issue a statement condemning what happened.
Is that enough,
everywhere.
though, a reactive
and that's
rather
one
than proactive?
Well, I think this is something on my recent trip to the States was mentioned to me. I think the voices are made, but the press don't cover them forcefully enough. Everywhere that I've been, every masjid that I've been, every imam that I've spoken to, they've all condemned what's happened. But we condemn not just what happens here, but all over the world. The difference is we cannot be selective in our condemnation. Just answering Lord Ahmed's point about self-regulation, if you know how the Financial Services Act works, and SRO theme came actually from the financial services sector where you had SROs. But eventually they led to a legislative and an ombudsman and the Financial Services Act. So some would argue that, yes, it's self-regulation at this stage, but it's the beginning of regulation. That's one issue. And if I may answer the Imams issue, roll into the future and you'll say, an imam will make a sermon and people would say, oh, he's one of the MinUp imams. So that means he's one of the government imams, ignore him. And you'll start breeding a separate imam
different
culture.
Classes of imams.
Yeah, who will be more respected. Okay. We don't want that.
Well, to be honest, I think it's quite... I'm surprised that I'm listening to this, but the majority of people who've responded, they are from ordinary communities, organizations from grassroots, from the Muslim community here in the United Kingdom. So MinUp is not a government sponsored. It's a community-based. It will be a charitable status. It is run by the Muslims, owned by Muslims, and it will be, well, actually, the people who will be training. This is not a theological training. You see, what you have to remember is that nobody is going to impose any religious training onto these imams. The training is of interfaith work, of community cohesion, of dealing with drugs, dealing with lots of problems, social problems in the society, but also conflict resolution and also engaging with young people. These are the sort of things that need to be. This is a kind of training for modernization of the way the mosques are run, because at the moment they're run like tribal kind of centers. And let's be honest, our elders have done a wonderful job. They came from the mountains of Kashmir or from the plains of Punjab or even from Bangladesh. They've done a good job, but now they've got to live in the West, and they have to have a proper structure that is charitable registered but complies with legislation in the United Kingdom.
Mohammed, what's got us to this, and you can respond to Lord Ahmed, but what's got us to this level where we're even having this debate on having to discuss how Islam is taught, the standard of people there, the fact it's, you know, only 30% are in English and so on. How have we got to this level?
It's been there throughout the time. The whole of history of Islam has been, there's never really been congruency or everybody agreeing to one thought. And it's trying to now get all of those different thoughts around a table to agree to a common aim. So that problem will be a perpetual problem. And in terms of responding to the MinUp, we at Regent's Park and other centres have in writing responded to the draft proposals that have been made. There's a deadline, the deadline is extended. We don't oppose in principle Muslims getting together in what Lord Ahmed's word were, you know, run by the community for the community. But this is not run by the community for the community, and I'll tell you why. Because it's being sponsored by 4 organisations at the moment: the MCB, the MAB, the BMF, and the Al-Khoi Foundation. Well, the MAB are a part of MCB. MCB have a number of mosques affiliated to them, and the BMF is, if you like, the other side to MCB. Al-Khoi is a small foundation with no affiliations to it whatsoever. So you've
suggesting it's not valid, really.
So it's not really valid. And what I'm also suggesting is, if you go through the draft constitution, the way the voting structure is done, those 4 organisations carry over 50% voting rights, and the rest of the country has less than that. How can that be in any way for the community, by the community?
20 seconds really to respond to
First of all, I'm not part of any of those organizations, but all these are umbrella organizations for lots of other smaller organizations. And the last point is that this is only a draft constitution. If they want to make changes, do it, but the idea is good.
Gentlemen, I have to say, we have so much to debate, never enough time, but thank you very much for taking us on this through this issue. Thank you. And thanks for being with us. On tomorrow's show, Britain's Shadow Home Secretary David Davis joins us to discuss some of the key challenges facing the United Kingdom today, including immigration and crime. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts, send your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time. Street Talk is next.